Good morning. Good morning, y'all. Welcome to Calvary on this first dry, perhaps day in a minute. Been sharing videos of overflowing streets and such this morning. I'm Catherine Bush, Associate Rector for Formation here at Calvary, along with Scott Walters, our rector, and we are coming to the end of this series. We've been reading along through Elizabeth Oldfield's book, Fully Alive, Tending to the Soul in Turbulent Times. Which I still maintain is a bait and switch, because what this book is about the 7 deadly sins. We have talked our way through wrath, avarice, acedia, envy, and gluttony, and today, to wrap the whole thing up, lust and pride. So we know you're glad you're here today for this conversation. Yeah, we'll get started. So just to say, one of the things that Elizabeth Oldfield does so well, I think, is take first the ancient term or the scriptural term or this idea and then kind of reset it into a modern language and modern setting and our milieu, and then to kind of organize our lives, I think, or another choice that we could make. So when she tackles lust, the move that she makes is to talk about that word, and then in our contemporary kind of setting and time, talk to us about objectification. When we turn people and things into objects, people particularly, and objectify and don't see their full humanity. And then the move that she makes from there is a move to humanity, to seeing the real person with whom we're interacting with and connecting with, whether that's in sexual terms or just any kind of real way that we might meet someone and remember that, actually, she's a great line about remembering that this other person is actually human, just like me, right? So that's today, and I'll pitch it.
Well, I mean, what's interesting about that to me, and this is a through line in all of these conversations, is that, you know, there are different metaphors or understandings of sin. Like, we might not want to talk about that, but one of them is like a stain. I'm stained. It's like it's an individualistic kind of understanding. Oh, I've got something wrong with me. But so lust could be that. Oh, I've got bad thoughts, or I've got bad feelings, or I've got something. We can process it in a very separate way. But each of these, what I think is interesting about her moves, which I think is really faithful to the stories and our tradition, is that they're all relational. It's not about an individual containing something dirty. It's about habits that we have in our relationships or the way we see people that break down. And if you read that first story, failures all have relational. They're metaphors that they're really familiar relations that are broken in our world, right? It's all of a sudden shame comes into my life, and I cover myself up from the person I thought I could trust, from God. Different motivators are coming in. It's a really wise story if you read it that way, and not just to say, oh, God laid down a law, and once humans broke it, then punishments were meted out. I mean, really, by elementary school, we can read those stories and see it on the playground and be like, oh yeah, I know how that works. I know I'm not at my best when I'm these things. So something like lust that the church has over the centuries on occasion been really damaging about in the way we've diminished sexuality and all of the things and been terrified of it, is a good one, I think, to move from this individual understanding to a relational understanding of how we see people. Objectification requires someone else in the equation for me to
be lesser. Or,
yeah.
And I do think, all of us at our core are probably one-trick ponies. You know, they say preachers we only have one sermon, really. We've only got kind of one core thing. And hers is connection. I mean, every single one of these, not just lust today, but is for her, that's kind of her ultimate, like, we are meant to be in relationship. We're meant to be connected, both with our humans that we're traveling around with and with God. So it's that relational connection piece that she just keeps coming back to every single time there's a problem for her. The ultimate problem is connection. So, speaking of some of the occasional damage that the church might have done in terms of talking about sex and lust and feelings and things like that, and taking that original story, that Genesis story of whose fault was it really? It was the woman's, right? And everybody makes choices in that story, but the piece that we lifted out and carried most kind of vibrantly for 3,000 years was Eve. Eve sinned. It was the woman's fault. Now women are lesser. It sets up hierarchy. It sets up kind of this punitive system where women have two options. You can either be Mary and virginal and on a pedestal, or you can be a fallen woman and a source of temptation and sin and the root of everything that ever went wrong, right? And those are like the only options. So that's one of the ways that we have taken these stories and our lived experiences and kind of warped them a little bit. We've also done horrifically damaging work around same-sex love and feelings and talking about the LGBT community and penalizing and punishing people for the feelings and loves that they have that are, as she makes a really good case, that are God-given and part of our way of connecting with one another. But again, the church historically kind of took that and said, here's another scapegoat, here's another problem, here's another way we can kind of beat you up with this, and kind of contort a story to make it really, really hurtful. That we are still, we are still working on that, trying to come forward.
Yeah, I wish that Ardell were here, because she's talked many times, and actually I heard an interview that Elizabeth Oldfield had with Jamila Jamir. She, if you watch The Good Place, she was this really sophisticated character in there, and she's quite a presence in England on social media, I guess. But she's come around. She said she described the horror of being a beautiful woman in a culture that not a long time ago, in the 2010s, it became somehow permissible for journalists, to find you walking out of a building and basically almost assault this person to get good pictures and whatnot. So she talks powerfully about how she internalized that. And actually part of what Ardell has talked about internalizing is internalizing it must be my fault. It must be the cut of my skirt. It must be because there's a whole narrative that is not ancient.
Right.
That is still out there, that places the onus on the person who's suffered this. So it's all difficult, and we get it really wrong.
We get it really wrong, and I think that's one of the things that she does, right? Is she takes these old words and sets them in the modern context. But actually, cut of your skirt is not new, and these are ancient, historical, misogynistic or homophobic habits that we have and that the church has supported, whether that looks like stoning you or whether that looks like conversion therapy, whatever that might look like. It's these kind of twisted stories, and then it does put the blame and the shame on the person who is on the receiving end of said rocks and stones or said whatever, or just attention that seems like it's nice. Like, wouldn't you want somebody to come take your picture if you are looking good? Except that, again, it turns this person who's a human into an object, into an advertisement for something, and that she's just a body and not a human. Trying to find the line where she talks about it's actually in the next chapter where she talks about realizing that someone else is real, right? That this person sitting next to me came in with their own story, and they're not just in service of my story or my agenda, or I'm the sun in my own universe, right? But they're not here for me to use them for my purposes, but they're here for me to meet them and to see them and to connect with them. And the moves that she makes as she kind of looks at particularly this concept of lust and objectification in this kind of sexual realm, is talking about sex without commitment, is talking about sex without connection, again, because her core values are connection and commitment and seeing people and being really in relationship. And that can go to some pretty extreme places and turn into violence and turn into all kinds of things that we know to condemn. But again, there's this kind of gray area in the middle that we can kind of take things and go awry. And in the middle of this conversation, she really lifts up these kind of, these stories that, again, are ancient, that alongside the Genesis story, there's the Song of Solomon, which is a beautiful, ecstatic, very sensual story of the love between two people. And we can allegorize that and talk about that's between God and humanity or Christ and the church. But it's also about two people who were clearly glad to see each other, right? And then she talks about the mystics experience and the Teresas of Avila and all these people who the language that they use to some of their most profound encounters with God is really ecstatic and is really charged with this, like, I don't have other words to describe for you except that it's this kind of powerful bodily experience where I feel moved and changed by my encounter. And so that's also a through line. That's also there in the church's narrative, that as much as we've got a story of misusing our identities and our sexualities and our feelings, there are also just as many stories of where it was lifted up and said, this is beautiful. This is a beautiful way of understanding how it works when we're really in touch with each other and in touch with God.
And truthfully, repression is usually not the best approach to things, but there is repression that comes from the right and from the left in these matters. I think as repression is, let's just set that aside and not think about it. I remember being in seminary and just hearing this. There was some conversation about sexuality going on, and everybody was squirming, and a woman was just like, she wanted to dismiss. She said, "Just it's just sex. It's just sex." Well, she, I think, wants to reclaim, it would be nice just to not worry about my desires, but my desires are damaged. Like part of the work I want to do in church is to realize I want to want better things. I want to want fuller life for the people I encounter and for myself. And I can't just get there without doing some of the messy emotional work to say, why do I feel that way? So sometimes that terrible track record of how we've used this so poorly and so abusively in once there's a temptation to walk away from it and say, well, we're above that, we're beyond that. So I think what Elizabeth Oldfield does when she reframes it is, I hope she says, no, there's wisdom in the tradition that says we have to attend to these parts of ourselves, the parts where we want and desire and wish and hope, not just the nice, rational, clean stuff where we wish we could just live all the time. And there are ways to do it if we name what we've gotten wrong and pull out the strands that are, I think, authentically in the tradition. I don't think she's making stuff up.
Right. And she adds to the tradition that is there. Again, there are these through lines, there are these stories, there are these people who said, no, this is part of a full human experience. This is part of everything that I am, includes these feelings or these thoughts or this, and not even on this topic, but on all that. It's got to be all there. We've been talking. This is in one of our Lenten preachers. I think it was Jeff Chu on Thursday, and Barbara Brown Taylor. They use the gospel story that ends with "Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect," and both of them kind of bemoaned this, like, that's a terrible high bar, and I want to walk away from it. But the word is actually completeness. I want to be complete. And if I'm going to be complete, then I have to include all of it, right? I can't just like cordon off and say, I wish my completeness were just the rational part of me from here up, right? But a complete me is all of it, right? And so there is this kind of gathering in the whole and presenting all of that forward and saying we can't just shunt these things off that make us a little squirmy to talk about with other people in church with a microphone on camera, just saying. So there is this piece, and again, if you're interested, some of you I know have found this book and are listening to it or reading it, and she's very full of candor about her life and her experiences and her relationship with her husband and all the things, and her own story is part of this, presented in the ways as a both a kind of a, this was, she's not saying her way is the only way, but she's saying here's a version of things, here's where it went south, here's where this felt really bad, and I knew it wasn't what was meant for, and this was beautiful, and this is good, and this is how I think about it and try to reach toward this goal. And along the way, she really wants to hold up in a way that I think you can almost kind of hear a little bit of apologetic in her. She's making the case for marriage. She's like, this is where it's at, right? Because if it's about connection and it's about being in relationship with someone, then the hookup version, the pornography version, these other things, while they have a place and she's appreciates what she can, but she's really pretty sure that the best way I know somebody is that I spend time with them. And I see them in all these different modes of my life, and I see them in all these different places, and that establishes relationship and connection, and over the long haul, more true, I keep using the word connection because so does she. It's possible to have a healthier, more complete, more whole relationship that includes all of these parts.
But I think I got to put big brackets around that and say she's talking about a particular subset. I think when I talk about, when people are getting married and I talk about the marriage as a sacrament, I say the only way it can be a sacrament is if it's for everybody.
Yes.
Whether you're married or not. There must be some nugget in when you watch two people in a community say a promise to say, I'm going to stay even after I fail you. There must be something that every single person can. So when she leans into that, I think she's leaning specifically against a sort of shallow, dismissive approach to sexuality that doesn't take it seriously. Right. Obviously, if you read the New Testament, I mean, the New Testament isn't big on marriage. Paul to Jesus to there's a lot of stuff in there to say, I mean, if you have to, that's fine. That's basically what Paul said. And so I think to make sure that when she drills down in the wisdom, it's like drilling down in the wisdom of those first stories. There's a lot of baggage the way it's been used, like you can't be whole until you've got a mate. That's not
and only a mate of an opposite gender.
And only a mate,
right,
yes.
So, yeah.
But so when she says that, I think it's I want to put those brackets around it to say, what could any person, a child, a grandparent, a single person, a coupled person, whatever, what could any person draw from ancient wisdom around relationships and desire and all of this?
Yeah. No, and I think it is really important for us to remember that these are not, none of these are really siloed. And none of these conversations are just for these kind of people who are having these kind of experiences, to your point. And to the point about the New Testament isn't real keen on getting married. In the Old Testament, getting married looked like something else entirely. It was, you can have multiple wives, you can have concubines. I mean, like the, biblical values around marriage are kind of sketchy all the way through. In terms of what we now want to hold up as like two people committed, consensual, all of these things. And there's value in that, but again, it could be more expansive in terms of always being called to see this person in front of me, however long this relationship, if it's fleeting in the grocery store line or if it's for my whole life, you are not an object and I'm not the subject, right? We're both subjects. There's not a user mentality or a objectification of like, what can I get from you and then move on? Or your feelings don't matter as much as my feelings because I'm aware of my feelings and I'm not aware of your feelings unless I take the time to slow down and consider them, right? And so again, that move away from people as objects in any level of relationship and in any style of interaction is really at the core.
And which then you can start to play it back into something like a weird marriage vow. Because then I can say, oh, I just saw this person say that this isn't going to be a transaction, that I'll hang out with you as long as it's good for me. Mm-hmm. I'm saying I'm in. And then I can turn to a friend and say, oh, right, I need to treat Peggy that way. Mm-hmm. I need to like not, as long as it's good for me and I'm getting more than I'm giving, then I'm in. That's the objectification that she's actually talking about, and it actually can apply. So I think that's her project, is how she picks up these strands of wisdom that are concrete and particular, and then helps us like apply them broadly in all kinds of other things. I mean, now that we've barged in where angels fear to tread, I'm curious to pause and just to, you know, as we've just opened up the topic that you promised you'd never talk about in church, especially on video.
And I'm going to bring you a microphone.
What is it? What questions or
thoughts or responses to some of these ideas
does it bring up?
Well, I just wanted to say I love the way she called out hookup culture and about how it's not good for women. That was the thing that I just loved in what she had to say, that you know, women in a sense have been sold a bill of goods about how, you know, this is freedom. But in a sense, then because young men tend to not want to get married, then there they are, you know. And I think maybe all of us have adult children who are not married who really would like to be, and so, you know, it's a dilemma in our culture, and this idea about connection and how the importance of that seems just well, really important to highlight.
And it is kind of a rabbit trail that she goes down, but it's clearly important to her. And if you're reading along in the book, this is a huge piece of her. And part of, I think, her reticence about kind of offering up marriage, you know, is because she's a feminist. And she's like, well, women have been given the short shrift in marriage, right? And so, but now they're being given this short shrift in this other, you know. So it's an interesting case that she makes about, and again, what is the church's role in these gender roles and gender expectations and relationships, and that's another part of the, you know, when she kind of gives you a real cursory sweep of biblical history of marriage, it's not great for women all along, and it was also, and there are these kind of corrective moments where it should be hard to get a divorce because that was going to put the onus on the woman to find her way in the world, and so she kind of unpacks all these layers and how they were imbalanced in terms of gender roles all along. She also has a wonderful, and I'm going to come back to y'all, but she's a part of her other thesis in this chapter is about power and who's got it and who doesn't in different relationships. This relates very much to objectification and what can I get from you and transactional, but it's also how she then looks at the biblical record around marriage and who it applied to and who it didn't and how you got in and out of them. And the very scant verses that we have about homosexuality was not, here are two people who have love and committed to each other. It was an imbalanced power relationship, and a lot of what the Bible is condemning is relationships that were more like prostitution or relationships where there was a clear power imbalance, and that was problematic, not necessarily the who they were identity-wise. So,
which is why Jesus wasn't setting aside the law. He was like, we have to keep looking at the dynamic in the law and saying, given our relationships and power imbalances today, what would it look like in these relationships? Like, what would the teaching look like in this? And so when he's seems to be criticizing attrition, he's not setting it aside. He's actually doing the deep work that we always have to keep doing.
Renovating,
that she's doing.
Instead of tearing down. Yeah. Other thoughts or reactions?
Yeah, just a general observation. What I've noticed in the past generation, you know, in terms of younger people and the pressure on them, is now there seems to be this ethos that my special soulmate will be everything, will be the entire package, my lover, my best friend, my financial planner, my personal trainer, my, you know, like everything, this person. And oh, he or she is wonderful, but somehow doesn't measure up to all of this. And then we're once again setting ourselves up and the other person for failure. No one person can be everything. We need other people in our lives.
I mean, that's really interesting, and because we've talked a time or two in this, I think about this concept of differentiation that psychologists talk about, which is like remaining whole as an individual and being in relationship. And we're now learning that the most healthy long-term friendships and marriages include that. It's not like melting into the identity of the other or needing the other to fill in all of my inadequacies. It's actually how you make a friendship, right? You're like, look, we have something that this person draws out this thing in me, and I'm able to be my fullest self, which is very different from what you're. So I appreciate that idea that there's this perfect person that's also very objective because I'm listing traits that's going to complete me in this way.
Which is also, they're going to complete me. They're going
Yeah,
to serve me. It's all about me,
yeah.
and not how are we together. I mean, and this is where, I mean, this is the, the taking the language of the two become one can lead you to that idea, but it's two. You have to be a two first, So, anybody? Yeah.
I like to think of it as being 2.5. You bring out the best in each other and enhance the other person.
Yeah. 2.5. 2.5. Yeah, Candace. And then we'll talk about pride a little bit.
Yeah, there was only one other thing that had come to my mind, and I apologize because it's not so much about relationship, but it's the concept of prurience.
Okay.
Prurience as
Yeah.
Lust as prurience as
Like that it's somehow dirty.
well, it is. I had to look it up
Yeah.
To understand what. I mean, I thought I knew what prurience was, and then I looked it up, and it was essentially an itch.
Oh, that needs scratching.
It's an itch that needs scratching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's an interesting. I mean, there's all these different layers to it, and the physicality, and the emotional quality, and So different pieces to it for sure. All right, let's talk about pride, which she says is the root of everything. Root of all evil, not money, except I think, yeah. Okay.
It is interesting to go from that to this.
Yeah, right, right.
But a through line certainly is, since she's framed lust in terms of a self-centeredness or an ultimate selfishness, pride, it makes sense that underneath all of these, if I forget relationship, if I forget that the person I'm speaking to or in relationship with is a whole entity worthy of their own personhood, and I need to let them be, and that's the best way to be in a relationship. Pride does end up being another form, or maybe that base form. Why do I keep pulling back to what can you do to me, for me? What can you provide me? Our economy doesn't help us with this. And then when we take metaphors from the economy, paying it back, paying it for, these can really play into a sense that we're transactional creatures rather than a certain kind of mutuality that maybe lets the 2.5 come forward. Like if we can have two people who are fully themselves, something else can come to be that can't when we're alone and not in relationships. So the metaphors are part of it too that could be.
Right, for sure. One of the things that she does almost in every chapter is she has to spend some time telling you what the thing is not. And so she starts the pride chapter in an interesting way of like, there's a role for pride. I mean, and when especially when we think about people who have been humiliated or have been put down, that to have, so we think about a pride parade, right? Like, go for it. Get your rainbow and your glitter, and own it and celebrate your identity because it has been so squashed and so damaged. And so she says it's not that. She's not anti-pride parades, right? She's not against her child is at a swimming lesson or something like that and makes it to the end of the pool and he's so proud of himself. And it's not that. Right? This is not the problem. It is the disconnection, the thinking that either I need you to serve me in some way or I don't need you at all, which is actually the full inverse of that transactional piece is I've got it. I don't need you. I don't need God. I don't need anybody. I can do this on my own. Thank you very much. Look what I just did. Yay, me, it's all of this language that is separating us, again, from the people we can actually see and from the God who we can't see, but we want to be in relationship with.
And if you think of your niece coming home from school having drawn a picture of you, and it comes up and says, "Look, I drew a picture of you." Isn't the, don't quash that, right? No, it's not that. It's not really a great likeness. You're just an average.
You seem a little full of yourself, so no.
But that pride is full of relationship, right? This is like joy in that I have something to offer out here, and that I have a gift. It's a childlike gift that I'm able to look. I'm getting better at this. That is so different from, look what I can do that you can't do, that makes me different from you. Look what I own that you can't own, that makes me different from you. Look, all of these, look at the code language I know how to deploy and make this room think I'm smart or funny or good, that you haven't quite figured out yet because you come from another tradition. All of those things that I recognize that tendency when I start to weaponize kind of my, whatever it is that whatever power I have or gift I have, rather than this gift exchange that we all live by all the time. Like we're always offering what we have. That's how we are, right?
One of the things that she goes back to the Genesis story again here, because one of the things that she's talking about when she's talking about, so her move, I didn't give you the vocabulary, is from pride, which she grounds in our modern context as individualism. It's a whole thing about the Frank Sinatra "My Way" song. I did it.
Not a fan. She's not a fan.
She's not a fan. Spoiler. Nor other people who like the song, but. So if individualism is then the kind of modern manifestation of that, then community and connection, no surprise, we've learned the song by now, but so she's talking about that what she believes we are called to as Christians and really just as people is to move outward, to move toward others, to turn toward, right? To turn out towards others, whether that's to help somebody in need or whether that's to love, but we're meant, the move we're supposed to do is this, but the move we often do is this inward move. And she's really poignant metaphor about ingrown toenails that just will stay with you. And now I've given it to you, so you can hold that for the rest of the morning and thinking about that, but this kind of burrowing inwards, instead of walking out the front door of the house, opening ourselves up, saying the hard thing, asking for help. Again, not in that kind of transactional, what can you do for me, but I'm going to be vulnerable enough to tell you, I can't do this by myself. I don't know how to do, I'm having trouble with this. I'm struggling. I'm all of these things. Can you meet me in this place? And that vulnerability and that turning, that kind of opening the door and saying, this is what it's like in the insides. Can you see that and still be in relationship with me, please? And that is what one of the kind of storytelling that she talks about.
Yeah, that really reminds me. My dad used to tell a story about how pride can masquerade as humility. He had a guy come in who said he's over and over again he'd offered help, and he finally just like slammed his hand on his dad's desk and said, "Why won't you let me help you?" And Dad said it as a point. I had this sense of being, it's impolite to accept it. I wouldn't want to impose on this other person. I wouldn't want them to go out. And the guy was like, this is what it means to be in a relationship. I do something hard that you can't do for yourself. And so that's what it. Your example in that feels very much like this sense. Sometimes I can have pride masquerading as humility. Oh, I couldn't. Oh, I didn't. No, I couldn't. And if I'm pushing you back with that, rather than letting you... I
actually really want to help you. I really want to,
And it's how we live.
Right. Yeah. Right. So she takes us toward community. She tells makes a really compelling case for communal living. She lives in a household with more than one nuclear family unit. So lots of that. If you're interested, it's a primer on how to do that. She also talks about the ways that we do that in less all-inclusive ways. So church, we come every morning at about the same time. All these people are going to be here. We like some of them. We don't like all of them. We all come, we all say, these are the things I did wrong this week, whether we do that in a kind of formalized confession or we actually share what we did wrong this week. And we put ourselves in community with others because we need that. And we have these routines. And it can be as simple, again, not as like merging your household with another's, but as saying, I will be at this place every week at 8 o'clock to meet you there, even when it's not convenient, right? And I won't bail, unless I really just can't. You know, I mean, like, I will be committed to showing up for you and making that sacrifice of my time and energy as much as I might make a sacrifice of anything else to be present to you.
And it's interesting. I've been thinking about this along the way too. Her church experience. I think she's Anglican now, but she would describe herself as charismatic. Mm-hmm. And when I've heard her in some conversations with some very smart philosophical folks about the existence of God and things. She has a really wonderful interview that she does on that. And what she refuses to do, she said, I had a deep experience of divine love. That's why I'm a Christian. I'm not a philosophical Christian. I had this deep felt experience of divine love. And so it's helpful to me to also, and this is another thing that I married into, this tradition of very different from the one you and I are probably used to since you're here at an Episcopal church, which is that part of the spiritual life is letting go of inhibitions and letting down our guards, which is another way of what you're describing, so that we can be vulnerable, whether it's the Spirit of God moving in the midst of a room or through language that I don't understand yet. There are ecstatic tongues that are spoken, that somehow something's getting out of me. So part of her wisdom has to do with that. Like, what does that look like in your context, in your life? And when we're talking about the life of the desires, messy stuff, it's messy stuff. It's not just like, do you have a contract to describe that relationship? It's getting down there. So part of the wisdom of her tradition is they're okay with the feeling stuff. Right. You know? Yes. My mother-in-law, you just say it and clean up the mess afterwards. And she was brilliant. I needed her in my life so desperately when we were so much more measured and don't rock the boat, don't, you know. Anyway, so.
Well, and even in the description of how gifts and giftedness comes in, I mean, scripturally, is that if you have the gift of tongues, you need someone else to have the gift of interpretation of tongues, because you can't do it alone. You can't do any of these things by yourself, on your own, without some sense of, it may be inconvenient for me to make a commitment to this community or to this person or to this institution or whatever it is, but I will also, I mean, it's so hard to not talk about this transactionally, but I will also benefit from being put into these places. This is the language that she uses in several chapters, as she talks about trellises, like a garden trellis, and having these structures upon which things grow. And so that they're not coercive, and they're not, you know, we think of, oh, if there are rules, then I'm going to be constrained and contained by them. But actually there's liberation inside of that the vine can only grow to its fullness if it's got a trellis upon which to attach itself, that we need these practices and structures and places in order to be fully alive, right? She also, other part of the community piece, and we've heard, again, there's lots of good preaching happening here these days, not to mention this morning, and Lillian Lammers was here for LPS a few weeks ago, and she talked to us about the loneliness epidemic, and there's front page of the cover story of the Atlantic last month. I mean, all of this language about how withdrawn we've become, how alone we are, how separate we've made our lives, whether that's because I just carry a phone in front of me or because I have literally absented myself from community, and how much there's a supposed ease that comes from that, because then I don't have to be bothered by your timeline or your needs or your messiness, but I'm also just withering when I'm that lonely and that alone, right? That there's a sense of, well, I do need to arrange my life around other people because that's what I'm here for.
Yeah. All right, so I'll do the Phil Donahue thing this time. I'm curious about your trellises. So if we describe pride, not as cockiness, but as this, and we want to move from this individualism toward community. You don't have to answer that question, but that's the one that presents it to me. What would you describe your trellises as? What would be the practices or the habits or the whatever that help pull you out of what Lillian was describing and into friendship, community, connection? Got any that come to mind?
What I keep thinking about is my now 9-year-old daughter. She was 6 at the time, and it was the Sunday after my husband Bill had died. And we had buried him on Thursday, and we came back, and it was Sunday morning, and Emma said, "Mommy, why aren't we getting ready for church?" And I said, "Oh, we don't have to go to church today. That's too much. Let's just stay home." And she was like, "Mommy, Daddy died. We are going to church, and we are saying our prayers and being with our friends." And I was like, "You go. Okay, here we are."
Wow. From the mouths of babes. That's wisdom. What isn't I heard the Dalai Lama say one time, I have a really intense full schedule today. I better pray for 2 hours instead of 1, or meditate for 2 hours instead of 1. Emma understands what practices ground her. That's beautiful. Any others come to mind? Any trellises that you've got?
During the pandemic, we had a pod family that we, got together with through the isolation days, and we started doing birthday parties for every person. And I drew on my old camp counselor days. There are party games, there are cakes, there are verbal gifts. There's this whole litany of things that we do for every birthday throughout the year. Now we're 5 years in, and we had 2 birthdays in March that, for scheduling reasons, we didn't get to have a party. And I said, we missed it. We have to do this. And we looked at the calendar in April. There is not one weekend day in April when we can all get together. So we are celebrating March birthdays, May 2, come hell or high water, because when we didn't, high water, sorry, yes. So when we didn't do it for a month, we missed it. It was like, well, we didn't get to give you all of our verbal gifts and tell you what we liked about you, and we didn't play the party games that Dave hates. But that's all part of the structure of how we're raising our families and ourselves.
You use the word litany, a ritual, and you're describing rituals that's interesting to me, that Emma knew there was a ritual that's part of her rhythm. You've created them that are not religious, but like the calendar's going to roll around and we're going to do this thing. We're going to stop doing what we just are rolling toward, and we're going to make up a little ritual. Isn't that interesting that humans do that?
So our neighborhood has had a lot of turnover in new families coming in. And I always go and I introduce myself and bring a little potted plant. And you do the whole exchange of this is who I am and this is who you are. And I've developed this pattern of I'll give them a little index card. I'll write down my name and my phone number and the names of the people in my family, because I at least don't remember when people tell me those things. And we say all the niceties, and oh yeah, if you ever need anything, let me know, and I'm here. And we do all that. And I've started making a point a couple weeks later to then ask a favor of that person, to break that seal and text them from work. A package was just delivered. Would you mind picking up and holding it on to me so it doesn't sit on the front porch? Or, I've got my muffins half made and I'm short an egg. Can I have an egg? I ask a favor of them because I think we all want that relationship where we have a neighbor that we give and take from, but we're awkward to start it. And I have noticed that when I start with asking a small thing of them, of new neighbors, that they will ask it of me, and we build this relationship of leaning on each other more. But it's awkward to make that first ask of somebody when you're not sure if you're there yet. And it has built our relationship, and I've enjoyed it.
Which sounds a lot like the story of your dad. I mean, in the terms of like not refusing, not letting someone else help you, right? Like Instead, letting the person, giving them the opportunity to say, I do have an egg. I can be useful to you, right? Like I can help, that it feels like an imposition, but it can be really like, then it makes me feel like I'm your hero today, which is a great feeling.
Yeah, to have your first act of friendship be, I love that, Karen. It's like to have it be, I already need you. Right. Or there's this small way in which like you have something to offer that I didn't that I don't have.
Especially as the person who's already grounded in the neighborhood. Like you have the power in that relation. You
That's
have
right.
the history. You have that. And so to come in need. Yeah.
Very different from, let me show you the ropes. I've been here 25 years.
Yeah, first of all, that's genius. We should all do that. I just wanted to go back to also your observation about being needy and, sort of turning things in. And I can say that for myself, for many years when I was younger, I fell into that trap of feeling that if I asked for anything, I was terrified of seeming needy, because to me, needy meant incompetent. And I was living in Washington, D.C., where everyone is super competent. I mean, God.
Or appear to be.
Yeah, that's it, appears to be. And I did fall into that trap of being really isolated and lonely. I finally, over the years, got over myself. And I think that is a form of inverse pride. Mm-hmm. Somehow I'm not capable. That's a certain level of strange pride. And I see it now again. I feel for younger people, if they're living on social media, everybody on social media is more beautiful than they are, richer than they.
Yeah.
You think, oh, I'm so inadequate. I might as well just, stay in my room and play with my Xbox.
And I hate to tell you, it ain't just the young folk. Yeah, no, it's really true. It's really true. And, and all of this reminds me that just the wisdom in the room around this stuff. Sometimes we talk about the loneliness epidemic and we just wring our hands for 15 more minutes. But part of the genius of this book is that she's not just talking about what's broken. She's talking about all of these little practices that actually, if you're in community, you realize that we have strategies and wisdom that can bring us into these, that can change. That's the wisdom of the deadly sins. The deadly sins, there were also virtues attached. There was this all exercise kind of idea that, I know that I get flabby if I do this, but I could actually exercise this part of my soul and I could be in richer, fuller relationship. So it's cool to have just this little room saying, you know what's worked for me? You know what strengthened relationships instead of reaffirmed this illusion that I'm enough, that I'm best off by myself and you guys don't mess up my life?
This is, as usual for me, it's an oversimplification of everything, but
Hold your microphone up.
I had this conversation coming in this morning because I picked up a friend who needed a ride down. And she was just saying, she's gotten to the point she doesn't mind asking for help. And I said, as much as we've all been taught, oh, you don't want to impose, the truth is you're denying that other person the opportunity to be helpful and useful. And it is an absolute fact. You cannot be depressed when you're doing something for someone else. It just gets you out of yourself, even if it's just for a moment. Right. But it is so important for us to help other people.
Right. And I think about that sense of that you can't be depressed, whether we're talking clinical or not, when you're helping, when you're serving, when you're, and the other thing that comes immediately to mind when you say this beautiful poem by Marge Piercy about to be of use. And that's what we want. We want to be in the thing, right? And to be useful is all. I mean, again, we're talking about pride. So we're not to say like I'm so important, so you need my help, but that I want to be part of the fire brigade. I want to be part of the project because I want to contribute and because that's actually how relationships and connections are formed, is by doing something together, right? So go look up the Marge Piercy To Be of Use poem because it's fabulous.
Yeah, I'll leak some news that I've told lots of people. I'm going to do sabbatical this summer, and the theme I'm really curious about are communities of craft. Some communities you join by saying, I'm going to sign off on this creed, so I'm one of you. I can come in. I believe that I'll join your political party because I believe these. Okay, you're one of us. Others might just have a hierarchy that I navigate my way. Most communities have both elements of both of those, but they're the old craft guilds. There was this sense of, yes, there was a hierarchy, but it really had to do with passing on knowledge bodily, really. You came in and you learned together. There's this mystery around Stradivarius violins that we still can't figure out what made them, but clearly there were dozens and dozens of craftspeople, not just Stradivarius, who were making them. So some knowledge was making its way in. And to this, all of these rituals we're talking about, to me, suggest this. Like, I want to be more fully myself in the world. I wish I could just think my way into it. I don't know if that's the best way. Could you make a community of practice that does these things that you've been talking about together so that we gradually move at least in the direction of wholeness that she's talking about, at least? And you know, the craft communities, the other piece about it is they had a really strong definition of quality. It wasn't just everything goes. It was like we challenge each other. We're like, oh, have you noticed this that might work when you're planting your crop, or this when you're, forging your steel? So anyway, I'm just noting that all of the things you are suggesting could also be seen as a community that's trying to kind of craft a better life together, a fuller life, and over time learning by doing.
Right. And I think that craft, this is a good wrapping up kind of moment. Perhaps what we started with her, of becoming more fully adept and equipped and alive, and, that these trellises and these practices and these rituals and all these kind of things take us back to the whole premise was these are the 7 deadly sins. These are the things that and again, as we said the first week, not because God says, you sinned, I'm going to smite you, deadly sins, but when you live these ways, a little part of you is dead, right? When your relationships are a little bit, are demeaned or dampened or gone, right? Or this part of you is not fully who God created you to be, with love and hope and creativity and all these things. And so the deadliness of these sins is the small daily dying stuff that we can learn to choose another path, right? And so then again, each time she gives us an alternative way of living. So that's the corresponding flip, the turn that we make away from these 7 deadly sins. Yeah. Amen. Good church today, y'all. We'll see you upstairs if we didn't see you at the first one.